You know, hey, everybody. It's a beautiful Thursday morning. Hey, great to see you. Thank you. I know it's a work day, and I know most of you are in the office, but this is social media. So you can pretty much do it anytime you want. You can jump on anytime, any day. Somebody will watch you. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to spend a few moments with me here on SML TV. Guys, let's talk about it. First of all, a few shout outs to you guys to make sure that I'm loud and clear. Hello, good morning, Mr. Moore. The involvement of the minutes. Okay, here it is. Let's read this. It's a bit long. Okay, this is De Silva. Okay, and I randomly select these comments. So I don't want you to sit there and think that this is pre-planned. This is a live television show, live Facebook show. So whatever I read it in real time. D'Angelo De Silva says, good morning, Mr. Muewa. The involvement of the former president's daughter and the broader family in corrupt activities is deeply disturbing. This suggests a pervasive culture of corruption within Lungu's inner circle, which cannot be ignored. To ensure a comprehensive investigation, it is imperative to lift the president's immunity, the former president's immunity, and subject him and his family members to thorough scrutiny. This is D'Angelo De Silva. And what an interesting comment. Let's talk about it. Before we do, did you guys hear about this Luisi, the former director at the Price Waterhouse, you know, the gentleman that killed his wife? He was narrating the story in court, talking about how him and his wife were married for 18 years. They had 2 children together. And one day, according to him and his testimony, she turns around and says to him, "These are not your kids." And apparently the couple had been going through turmoil and they were actually living separately. And according to his testimony, Luisi's testimony, he said that my wife said to me, "These children are too beautiful to be yours. These were never your kids," and that somebody else fathered them. And in his testimony, he said that when she said that, she killed a light in me, is what his testimony was. Because of the words that she spoke. Ladies, the word of God says life and death are within the power of the tongue. And of course, we're not justifying what happened. Nobody can ever justify such a heinous act, but we're just describing what happened. And it just shows you how important words are. And of course, she's not here to testify or to corroborate. You know the word corroborate? Corroborate with an R, not with an L. Corroborate. She's not here to verify his testimony. She's dead. So he can pretty much say whatever he wants. But the fact is, even though we were not there, we know things like that happen. We know people say things like that. We know people say to their husbands or to their wives, These children are too beautiful to be yours. I mean, well, to their husbands, rather. These children are too beautiful to be yours. And according to him, he went into a rage. And what was so sad about his testimony was that he said, I was so enraged, I even lost count of how many times I stabbed her. He stabbed his wife to death in the kitchen. I lost count of how many times I stabbed my wife. It's just a sad story, a really, truly sad story. All righty, let's get into it, guys. All of you know, you've been hearing about this. And let me preface what I'm about to say by saying this. You know, aid, or as we say in my country, in my language, uwafwirisho, has now become an entrenched part of the African development landscape. If we're asking for aid at a national level, if the whole country is in debt, is indebted, asking for alms aid from the international community, if we're doing that at an international level, what do you think is happening down here with the average citizen? The citizenry is mirroring what's happening up here. Our citizens, our people are copying what's happening up here. This is the reason you can walk down Cairo Road, Lumumba Road. All you hear all day long, every day, the country is enslaved in poverty. By and large, most of our people are poverty stricken. And because our people live in poverty, most of our people, not everybody, but most, the pool of leadership from which we select our leaders is mainly comprised of poor people. So if you've got a counselor who's poor, who's never had a proper house, you give him the power, you vote him into office as a counselor, guess what he's going to do? He's going to go run amok. By the same token, in the same vein, when you have a man who vies for the highest office in the land, a man who wants to be president of a nation, but if you look at his track record in terms of his finances, in terms of his standing in the community, in terms of his entrepreneurial skills, in terms of his business acumen, zero. And yet this is the same man, whoever that is, the same man that you are going to put into office. What do you think is going to happen to such a man? A man who comes from a background of poverty, a background of lack, a background of not having much, and now all of a sudden, not only do you give him access to truckloads of money, but you give him truckloads of power. What do you think is going to happen? It's like taking a hungry child, a child who's never seen a chocolate cookie in his life, and then all of a sudden you introduce that child into a big store full of cookies, full of chocolates, full of biscuits, and you say, go in there and do your thing. It's going to do what it's going to do. It's the same thing. So what needs to happen in this country is that we need to begin to scrutinize our potential leaders. We need to know that they're coming from a background of substance. Of course, not to suggest, it doesn't mean that just because you're rich, it doesn't mean that you can't be corrupt. The world is replete. There's so many examples of rich people that are corrupt people. And it doesn't mean just because you're a businessman, you can be a good president. I think our president is the exception to that rule, because if you look in South Africa, if you go to South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa is supposed to be a very colorful businessman. But look at South Africa. It is an absolute mess. They don't even have electricity. They've got a load shedding problem that would make us look like amateurs. So my point is, it doesn't mean just because you're a person of substance that you can't be corrupt or you cannot perform as a leader. It doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is that we as a people have to take a closer look at who we elect into office. There's nothing wrong with taking a closer look at someone. But in Zambia, you've got this idea that no, God does not vote. You must understand that. God does not vote. We do not have a monarchy. We do not have kingships in terms of the presidency. You and I elect our leaders. You and I do that. God doesn't do that. I've given you the example before. God creates the tree. You and I make the chair. God creates the tree. You and I make the table. God creates the ocean. You and I make the boat that goes on the ocean. Are you getting that? So my point is we need to begin to elect leaders of substance and leaders that we can have a closer look at, so that when we do vote, we vote based on an informed decision, not this idea that no, wrong. God doesn't vote. You and I do. So here in the recent past, last few days, the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecution, wants Esther Lungu's flats meaning apartments, okay, and Tasila Lungu's properties forfeited. For those of you that do not know, Esther Lungu is the wife of the former president of the Republic of Zambia, Mr. Edgar Lungu. His wife's name is Esther. His daughter, President Lungu's daughter's name is Tasila. They're in a bit of a tussle with the DPP. The DPP wants their properties forfeited to the state. As all of you know, and you know, this is public knowledge. This is not something that I'm sort of outing. Everybody knows that 15 double-story flats belonging to former President Lungu's wife, Mrs. Lungu, located in the State Lodge area, were built at a cost of approximately $2 million. Okay, and then the DPP, they did some investigations. They discovered that her income didn't match what she possesses. And the same thing applied to Esther, Tasila. Now, the DPP, as I've just mentioned, the DPP also wants Tasila's property located over there in Sinda, in the Eastern Province. They want that property forfeited as well, because according to them, you know, they've looked closely at what she earned as a counselor, all the sitting allowances, they put it all together. It didn't match what she owns. So here's the deal now. Here's the question. Not the question. Here's what I wanted to say. Power attracts money. Anytime you have a person who becomes president, especially within the African context, it happens everywhere, but in particular, Zambia, whenever you have a person who becomes president, automatically money just comes to you. You know, the Chinese bring you sack loads of money, cases full of money, you know, and you don't even have to account for it. They just bring it to you. It's very difficult to resist that, especially when you've come from a background of lack. That's very important. Let's be clear about that. Let me say that again, because I think it's very important. It's very difficult because we're human. It's very difficult to resist that, especially when you have a background of lack. L-A-C-K, lack. You don't have it. And then all of a sudden now, you have it. In those situations, power attracts money. And, you know, this is the reason during Dr. Kaunda's era, or era, you can say both, era, same thing. During Dr. Kaunda, the leadership code drew a distinct line between service and personal enrichment. In those days, it was very difficult for you to be in government and be a flashy entrepreneur. During that time, Dr. Kaunda basically said, you know what, if you're going to serve, serve. If you want to be a businessman, leave government. Don't use your government position to become a billionaire. If you want to be a businessman, be a businessman. But if you're going to be a civil servant, if you're going to be an elected official, if you're going to be a public official, Dr. Kaunda had something called the Leadership Code. And the Leadership Code basically said that. If you want to do business, leave government. If you're doing business while in government and the government finds out about it, guess what? They'll let you go. They say bye. I'll never forget my father, the late Dr. Simon Mwewa. You know, the man that built Simoson and built McKinney Simoson, built that house over there in Manchinchi. He used to say to me when I was a little boy, he says, you know, son, this was back when we were living in a house this was in the Kablonga area. It was a government house in those days. And he said to me once, he says, you know, and I, as a little boy, I didn't understand why he was telling me this. Of course, when I grew up later on, when I looked back, I understood exactly what he was saying. I remember him and I were sitting down, and just out of conversation, he said to me, he says, you see that spoon over there? And I picked up the spoon. He says, yes. He says, that spoon belongs to the government. It belongs to the party and its government. In those days, that was UNIP. Whenever you heard someone say the party and its government, that was UNIP. My dad said to me, you see that spoon there? If for some reason, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda asks me to leave the government, do you know that I can't even take that spoon with me? I said, really? He says, yeah. You know why? Because it belongs to the government. He said, do you see this house? And you know, in those days, we were living in this beautiful big house. It had a nice pool, you know. He says, you see this house? If for some reason Dr. Kaunda asks me to leave the government, this house doesn't belong to us. So it's better that you and I and your mother live in a small house, but it belongs to us, rather than living in a big house that belongs to the government. So what I'm saying to you is that I think in this dispensation, we need to come up with our own version of Dr. Kaunda's leadership code. Maybe not exactly the way he did it, because things have changed now. Things are different, you know. But there should be some type of framework, because these cases we're hearing now, the same way we're hearing about Tasila Lungu and Esther Lungu, it'll just keep going. It's going to happen also in this current government in some form or another. I mean, we appreciate the fact that, and I'm thankful that I appreciate the fact that we have a president that has substance. His goal is about service, but it doesn't mean that the administration is perfect. No administration is. So what I'm saying is that moving forward, even beyond or post Hakainde Hichilema, after Hakainde Hichilema serves his term, we need to begin to think of how to set up a framework that safeguards the sanctity of our nation. We shouldn't just have people in there for the sake of being in there. They'll do whatever they want. We will always have this problem of government officials, people that are elected into positions of government, but all they do when they get there is steal, rob, pillage, and run amok. It needs to change. And we have to look beyond or post Hakainde Hichilema. Hakainde Hichilema is the exception to the rule. We've never had a president of substance. We've never. We've never had a president that literally came to office and said, look, I don't need anything. I want to serve my nation. We've never had a president who walked into the office and said, all of my salary, I'll just donate to charity. Those are rare. And I'm not saying that every president should be like that, because we're all different. The next president after President Hakainde Hichilema will be very different from him. But what I'm saying is that we should have at least some type of framework that safeguards the nation from things like this, issues like this. Do you agree? I think that we should move in that direction. All right. Oh, this is a good question. He says, how did your father manage to build that your building? Because he was just a mayor. Let me tell you the story. This plot here was owned by the Isas. And this was back in 1985, 86, 87. And my dad bought it from Mr. Isa. He got a loan from, what was the name of that bank? I'll get it right. There was a bank, Mr. Nizam was the managing director of that bank. My dad got a loan from that bank to build this building, to answer this question. That was many years ago. Alola sound. Okay. Let me read one more comment. Okay. I've answered that question. Sarah says, if that's true, then those Chinese did not give just from the goodness of their hearts. They must have gotten something in return. Oh, dear. Funny. Guys, also remember, when it comes to Simoson building, remember this was 1986, 87. This part of town was considered the outskirts of town. Don't look at Simoson City Market now the way it looks now. Now it's everybody's here. In those days, when you said you're going to Simoson, it meant you were going out of town. Nobody cared about this place. The plot in there's a McKinney Simoson there in McKinney. It's a pretty big plot. It's a large plot. Do you know how much my dad paid for that thing? 20 million kwacha in those days. 20 million. Now it's worth a lot of money. But my point is, things have changed. I mean, to build, if we were to sell this plot, which we're not going to do, we've never even thought of doing that. If we were to sell Simoson, you know how much money it's not the building that's worth money, it's the plot. This piece of land is a very valuable piece of land. So things have changed. And, I've been reading the way this guy said, from what I know, how did your father manage to build that cheap building? And let me tell you something about Simoson. As ugly as it is, and it is ugly, I'll accept that. But it's 100% occupied and it's 100% debt free. Boom. Sorry, I had to say that. I had to say it. Hey, guys, thank you for watching. God bless. Have a great day. Bye.